He was pouring himself another glass of red wine when I caught myself watching his hands. Large, slow, deliberate movements. He didn't fumble, didn't hesitate, didn't fill the silence with awkward comments, just refilled the glass, set the bottle down with a quiet thud and looked at me, not in a way that lingered, not inappropriate, but with a kind of knowing, calm presence that left me more uneasy than I expected. My husband had excused himself to take a work call upstairs. He always took his work calls upstairs, even during family dinners. It was easier that way. Less noise, better reception, and no one would overhear the way he shifted from husband to project manager without pause. His father stayed behind, offered to help with the dishes. I told him no at first, out of habit, but he insisted gently, and I gave in truthfully, because I didn't want to be alone. It was quiet between us for a while. The plates were warm, slick with soapy water. I passed them to him to dry, and he folded the towel with steady hands, like someone who had done this 100 times before. "You always move this quietly?" he asked suddenly, voice low and even. Not teasing, not flirtatious, just a question, curious, but direct. I hesitated. "Maybe," I said, "maybe I just learned not to take up too much space." He didn't smile or nod. He just dried another plate, held it to the light to check for streaks, and placed it on the rack. There was nothing dramatic in that moment, nothing bold, just air, but the air felt thick, charged, like a room just before the lights flicker, and I hated that I noticed it. On paper, my marriage was fine, no major fights,
no betrayals,
no secrets tucked away in hidden folders. We had routines, weekend brunches, matching towels, shared calendars, but inside those neat lines, something in me had gone still. I couldn't remember the last time I reacted to my husband, not because he was unkind, just distant, polished, predictable, as if even closeness had become procedural. A list. Connection? Check. Effort? Check. 5 minutes, then done. I never said anything. I kept folding laundry, buying groceries, and accepting his compliments like folded napkins. "You look beautiful." "You're amazing." "I'm lucky." Always the same, delivered with the polish of someone performing a role. But his father, he didn't say those things. He didn't fill space with words. He simply was, fully, quietly, present. And that quiet presence, strangely, stirred something I hadn't felt in years. After dinner, the others left the table one by one. Some went outside, others retreated to the guest rooms. I stayed behind to gather the cups. He stayed too, though there was no reason to. I bent to pick up a fork that had fallen, and when I stood up, I felt him nearby, not close enough to touch, but near enough that I caught a faint scent. Not cologne, something more natural. Clean fabric, warm skin, the trace of soap. It surprised me how quickly I recognized it again the next day. "You know," he said quietly, "he was just like this when he was younger." It was a reference to his son, my husband. A small comment, tossed gently, but I held on to it. There was something about the way he said it that made me feel noticed, and I hated how much I didn't mind that. I tried to brush it off, changed the subject. "He always says he got it from you," I replied. He laughed, barely, a hum more than a laugh. "I doubt that. It wasn't flirting." That's what I told myself. There was nothing said or done that crossed any line, but I felt something shift. In my posture, in the way I stood, in the way I became suddenly aware of the fabric of my blouse on my back. The skirt I hadn't changed out of after dinner. He didn't comment, didn't let his eyes linger. He just moved around me with patience, with stillness, with unnerving. When the dishes were done, he thanked me, and said he was heading to bed. I stayed in the kitchen after he left, running my fingers along the marble edge of the counter. Upstairs, the house was quiet. The door to my bedroom was closed. Inside, my husband was likely already asleep, phone buzzing softly beside him. probably with another muted work notification. I didn't want to go up. Not yet. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea I wouldn't drink, and stood barefoot on the cold tile, and I let myself remember how close he had stood, how intentional his movements were, how still everything had felt. It was nothing. I told myself that more than once that night, but it stayed with me, in the way real things do, quietly, steadily, like something that returns from far away just to remind you it was never really gone. And when I finally climbed into bed beside my husband, I lay on my side, eyes open to the dark, wondering, not about what had happened, but what could. That was the part that kept me awake, the wondering, the way my body responded to something it had no reason to notice. He hadn't touched me, but something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I wanted to unfeel it. Morning didn't wash the tension away. If anything, it settled deeper into me. He was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, wearing a faded t-shirt and worn-in sweatpants that didn't try to impress. But the way he stood there, grounded, present, it changed the air in the room. He didn't speak to fill the silence. He simply existed within it, and somehow, that said more than words ever could. My husband walked out of the bathroom with a towel over his shoulder, kissed the top of my head absent-mindedly, and muttered, "I need to leave earlier than planned." Then he disappeared upstairs, finishing his routine as if this morning were like any other, as if my body hadn't spent half the night remembering a silence that echoed louder than anything he'd ever said. I made coffee. I didn't want it, but it gave my hands something to do, something to hold while they tried to steady themselves. His father sat near the window, sunlight drawing a quiet line along the bridge of his nose. He didn't say anything, just set his mug gently next to mine, as if it belonged there, as if I did too. When the front door clicked shut behind my husband, the house seemed to shift. Nothing moved, nothing visible changed, but everything felt different. Dansé. Like the air before a summer storm. I stayed busy, vacuuming, folding towels that didn't need folding, sorting laundry that had already been sorted. Just motion, no meaning. He stayed outside in the garage, fixing something unimportant. Every now and then, a small clatter of tools would reach me, the sound of metal on wood, and strangely, it echoed somewhere low and deep inside me. When he came back in, he didn't say much, just nodded. There was no awkwardness, no discomfort, only the space between us, quiet and tight, like a thread pulled just before it snaps. I hated how normal we were pretending to be. I went upstairs for a shower, hoping the water would clear the restlessness from under my skin, but it didn't. If anything, it made me more aware of every touch, every movement. Even the pass of the washcloth across my skin stirred something I thought I'd buried. I leaned against the cool tile, breathing slowly, trying to calm a pulse that no longer listened to reason. When I stepped out, wrapped in a towel, hair damp and clinging to my shoulders, I felt oddly exposed. Not because I wasn't dressed, but because my skin remembered too much. Then I saw him. I hadn't expected him to be there, in the hallway, tool in hand mid-step. We both froze. My towel slipped slightly, revealing more of my leg than I intended. I should have adjusted it. I didn't. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, he didn't look away. There was no smirk, no boldness, just stillness. Oh, and something else, held back. "You're trembling," he said softly. I'm not even sure he meant to say it aloud. "Maybe because you're standing too close," I replied, though my voice didn't sound distant. It sounded like a door left open. He didn't move toward me, but he didn't step away either. The moment that followed wasn't reckless. It wasn't even sudden. It felt inevitable, like reaching for something that had always been just within reach. His lips were warm, still, gentle in a way that made the room tilt. There was no rush, no force. He kissed me like someone who understood how easily something real could slip away. Slowly, with care, my breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I let myself exist in that small space, where there were no roles, no titles, only feeling. When he pulled back, I stepped away, not because I wanted distance, but because I didn't trust what might happen if I stayed. Neither of us spoke. I climbed the stairs, the towel soft and damp against the backs of my knees, my skin still humming. In the bathroom, I leaned against the door, eyes closed, heart racing in a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. He hadn't done anything wrong, hadn't said anything he shouldn't have, but something inside me had changed. Something had awakened, something that longed, something that finally knew. And most of all, I realized I would feel that longing again. The third morning came with an unexpected stillness, not the kind that follows a good night's rest, but the kind that wraps around your body like a sheet pulled from the freezer, cold, thin, and impossible to ignore. I stood at the kitchen counter, slicing strawberries for no one in particular, the blade making soft, damp sounds against the cutting board. My husband sat nearby, barely awake, sipping coffee like it was medicine, his eyes fixed on something beyond. I watched him a moment longer than I should have. There was nothing exactly wrong with him. He was clean, punctual, polite, but he was beginning to blur into the background of my life. Present, yes, but faded, like a pattern I stopped noticing. He looked up briefly and asked if I wanted to join him on a short trip out of town. A weekend getaway. Some vague mention of a cabin. Time away. Disconnecting. It should have made me feel something. Gratitude, maybe. Hope. But instead, there was that quiet resistance in my chest, like my body already knew the answer before my mouth could catch up. I think I'll stay, I said, after a pause just long enough to be noticed. There's a lot I need to take care of here. I haven't even sorted the storage room yet. He didn't push. He rarely did. By noon, his suitcase was zipped. He kissed my cheek without really looking, and I tried not to pull away. There was no anger, no sharpness, just the strange awareness that even his touch had become part of the routine, like the way people greet each other at formal gatherings, warm, but without meaning. After he left, the air in the house shifted again. It wasn't obvious, but I felt it, the kind of shift you feel in your chest before the rain starts. I walked slowly through the house, not sure what I was looking for. Space, maybe, silence, or just something that made me feel like myself again. He arrived around 3 in the afternoon. I didn't expect him to knock before coming in. It was his son's home, after all. But he knocked anyway. 3 soft, deliberate taps, as if he wasn't asking for entry, but permission to be seen again. I opened the door without saying anything. He stood there in a navy jacket, collar slightly turned up, hair tousled by the wind, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of apples and cinnamon. I brought something, he said, holding it out without much ceremony. I took it. The warmth from the bag seeped into my... A small detail, but oddly, I remembered that warmth longer than anything I eventually tasted. He didn't linger in the kitchen. He walked into the living room like he belonged there, settled into the armchair by the window, and rested his hands on his knees. I followed a few minutes later, the bag still unopened in my hands. We didn't speak at first, just shared space. And somehow the silence wasn't empty. It felt layered, like there were thoughts stacked inside it. He was the first to speak, his voice softer than I remembered. Did you mean to stay behind? I didn't pretend to misunderstand. Yes, I said. There was no judgment on his face, only a subtle shift in how he sat, like he just set down a weight he didn't realize he was holding. You didn't have to, he said, almost to himself. I noticed how his fingers folded and unfolded in his lap, hands that looked steady, capable, not like my husband's, which were used to swiping screens and typing passwords. There was something grounding about the way this man simply was, like the world gave him a bit more gravity than most. I thought about the kiss again, not the act itself, or even the sensation, just the way I had leaned into it without thinking. That part unsettled me, how little resistance I'd felt, how much I had not wanted to resist. He stood at some point and walked to the window. I watched the light fall on the back of his neck. There was nothing bold in how he moved, nothing pointed, but something about his presence made the space between us feel charged. Eventually we spoke, about nothing much, weather, the neighbors, furniture, but even inside the ordinary, there was something else, a hum, a thread of silence beneath the words, the things we didn't say getting louder with each passing sentence. As afternoon shifted toward evening, he stood up and said he should go. I walked him to the door, the bag of pastries still untouched on the counter, like a gift we weren't sure how. We paused at the door, no words, no contact. Then he said, "You don't have to explain anything." It wasn't said to comfort me. It felt more like a mirror, reflecting everything I hadn't wanted to name. I nodded, lips pressed together, throat dry. When he left, I didn't move for a long time. I stood by the door, staring at the quiet street, my hand resting on the frame as if it could hold me steady. Upstairs, the bed was freshly made. The sheets still smelled of lavender and detergent. I sat on the edge of it, my fingers running along the seam of the pillowcase. But my body wasn't quiet. It was restless, uneasy. It remembered everything. The warmth of his breath nearby, the calm in his voice, the quiet in his hands. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just sat there, still in my blouse and jeans, and came to a realization that startled me. I wasn't waiting to feel guilt. I was waiting for him to come back. I didn't see him the next morning, and maybe that should have felt like relief, a break in whatever I'd fallen into. But instead, there was a quiet ringing in my chest, a kind of hollow weight I carried with me from room to room. I moved slowly, deliberately, finishing chores that didn't need doing. I refolded sheets, reorganized the pantry, scrubbed the tile grout in the downstairs bathroom, anything to keep myself from feeling like I was just waiting. But the quiet didn't help. It only made the pressure under my ribs worse. Around noon, I opened the hallway closet to find a tablecloth and saw something tucked against the back wall. A paper bag, old, but perfectly folded, no dust. I took it out without thinking, but my chest tightened the moment I realized what was inside. A box, thin, rectangular, wrapped with unusual care. No ribbon, no tag. Just a note scribbled on a scrap of paper and placed under the lid. If it doesn't fit, throw it away. That was it. I held the box for a full minute before opening it, letting its weight settle into my... And something quiet but sharp stirred in me. I didn't even know why it made me nervous. When I finally opened it, I found a single item of clothing inside. Something simple, soft ivory in color, smooth, minimal, the kind of fabric that doesn't shout but quietly speaks. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't cheap, and it was exactly my size. He hadn't asked, he hadn't guessed, he had simply known. I took it upstairs with careful steps, like I was carrying something that didn't belong in the daylight. The bedroom was lit with warm afternoon sun when I shut the door behind me, the floor soft beneath my feet, and the mirror standing tall against the wall like a silent observer. I didn't try it on immediately. I just stood there, holding it in both hands, wondering what it meant that I wanted it so much. Not the item itself, but the feeling that came with it, a feeling I hadn't had in years, that I was seen. Not as a wife, not as someone's daughter-in-law, but simply as a woman, someone whole with her own sense of presence, and yes, still capable of wanting something unnamed. I changed slowly, not out of performance, but from something close to reverence. My hands moved carefully, touching my sides, my ribs, as if I were learning something new about myself. I looked in the mirror not to admire, but to acknowledge the marks of time, the soft places, the familiar angle. And none of it felt like loss, it felt like honesty. I slipped the piece on. It fit like it had been waiting for me. Not too tight, not too revealing, just right, like a whisper instead of a shout. I looked at myself in the mirror again. It wasn't about appearance. It wasn't about attraction. It was about being present in my own skin, about knowing I still existed with intention, that I hadn't disappeared into the routine of my life. I stood like that for what must have been 10, 15 minutes. The sunlight behind me shifted across the wall, soft, And in the quiet, I could almost feel the echo of his presence, not in words, but in how he had looked at me, like I mattered. The next few hours moved in a haze. I didn't change. I just put a robe on over it, something soft, loose, and continued through the house like that. I made tea. And then just after 5, I heard it again. The knock. It wasn't a surprise, not really. I opened the door slowly, the edge of my robe brushing against my knees. He stood there with a bag of groceries. No smile, just that same quiet steadiness that had slowly started to undo me. I thought I'd cook, he said, if that's all right. I nodded and stepped aside. We didn't speak much while he unpacked in the kitchen. Vegetables, herbs, a small bottle of wine. He moved with ease, like it was something he used to do every day. I leaned in the doorway, watching his hands, remembering them, not for what they had done, but for the way they moved, certain and patient. At some point, he glanced back over his shoulder. His eyes landed on the edge of my robe, the skin just beneath it visible for a second. He didn't stare. He didn't say anything unkind.
Et juste mes mailles.
And something quiet passed between us, like a thread pulled taut. You're wearing it, he said. It wasn't a question, and I didn't